Chapter 2, Lesson 1, Part 1, Adding Integers with the Same Sign and Adding Opposites. First, vocabulary. Please put these in your notebook. Integers are all negative and positive counting numbers, including 0. An additive inverse is a number and its opposite. Example, -4 and 4. And then zero pair. An additive inverse is a zero pair because when added together, they always equal 0. Adding numbers with the same sign. We have method 1 here where we can use a number line. I'm going to start by drawing a number line from -10 to +10. I'm going to need a little more room here, I see, so I'm just going to extend my number line. There we go. So step 1, find your first digit on the number line. So we're going to work with example 1 here, where I'm going to add 3 plus 6. So I'm going to find my first number on the number line, 3. Change color so that's easier to see. 3. And then step 2, if adding a positive, move that number of spaces to the right. So 3 plus 6, I'm adding a positive 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Where I land is my answer. So 3 plus 6 equals 9. Now, example 2 here, we can also try. So I start at my first number, -2. And then I look, if adding a negative, move that number of spaces to the left. So -2 plus a -3 is 1, 2, 3, -5. -2 plus -3 equals -5. So another example here, adding numbers with the same sign using method 1, -3 plus -5. And I'm starting at -3. And then I'm moving to the left 5 because it's a negative number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I get -8. So you can use a number line anytime, but that can get more difficult when we get to larger numbers. Method 2 uses absolute value. So step 1, we're going to find the absolute value of both digits. So in our first example here, the absolute value of 15 and the absolute value of 6 is simply 15 and 6. We're going to add them together in step 2, which equals 21. And then step 3, use the common sign for the sum that we arrived at in step 2. Because they were both positive, our answer is going to stay a positive 21. In example 2, we have -4 plus -7. Then I'm going to find the absolute value of both. The absolute value of -4 is 4. And the absolute value of -7 is 7. Step 2, I add them together. That equals 11. Then finally, step 3, I'm going to use the common sign from the beginning of the problem. So because they were both negatives in the original problem, my answer will also be negative. So -4 plus -7 equals -11. So again, another example here where they just show you finding absolute value. -3 is +3. Remember, the absolute value of any digit is always positive because absolute value describes distance, and distance can't be negative. So they did the -3 plus -5. They added the absolute value of +3 and +5. Made it 8. And then in the last step here, they simply added that negative since we started with 2 negatives. So let's do some practice using method 1 here, We have -2 plus -1. We're using our number line starting on -2. Because I'm adding a negative, I'm going left one space, and I end up at -3. So -2 plus -1 equals -3. If I'm using method 2, the absolute value, first I'm going to find the absolute value of both of my integers. The absolute value of -2 is 2. The absolute value of -1 is 1. So that means my new problem is 2 plus 1, which of course is 3. And now I have to add in my original sign of the problem because they're both negative. They will be negative. So let's just do some examples here. Again, using the absolute value. I think that method's a little quicker than drawing the number lines. And I think you should get used to that one only because number lines, like I said, can get a little difficult when we get to dealing with really large numbers, like in the hundreds. So -4 in number 22, -4 plus -5. First, I'm going to find the absolute value, -4 and -5. The absolute value of -4 is 4. The absolute value of -5 is 5. I'm going to add them together. That will equal 9. And then I'm just going to go back in at the end. And because both of my signs were negative in my original question, my answer will also be negative, -9. Number 23. First, find the absolute value of both digits. -11's absolute value is 11. -3's absolute value is 3. Added together, that's 14, of course. And in my question, I had 2 negatives, so my answer would be a -14. Why don't you try number 24 and 25 on your own? Pause the video and press play when you're ready to check your work. On this next slide here, we are talking about adding opposites. So as I said in your vocabulary earlier, that anytime you add opposites or additive inverses, we're always going to get 0. So anytime you add an integer to its opposite, the sum will always be 0. That got cut off a little bit, no big deal. So you could use the number line to check that work. As you see, we have 3 plus a -3. So we'd be starting at 3 on our number line. Because we're adding a negative, I'd be moving left 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3, and I wind up at 0. So positive 10 in number 26 plus -10, and they're additive inverses. So it's always going to be 0. No matter how large of a number you have, the additive inverses will always be 0.